Good morning and God bless you on this Monday morning. I'm recording this devotion here in Lincoln City. I've been enjoying a few days at the coast doing some writing and just having some downtime, and I wanted to get this devotion to you. And if you can see in the background, we're kind of in the middle of that high wind and heavy rain warning that the Weather Service put out. And so there's some stormy seas behind me. As we continue our series, Can You Relate? And now we're in the book of 1 Kings. We come to 1 Kings 16, and we're introduced not to one of the descendants of David, but to one of the kings of Israel, Ahab. And Ahab is one who has a notorious reputation for being a truly wicked and evil king. And I would add not only wicked and evil, but there's a certain sense where he's a sniveling, cowardly guy. And so we'll come up with a couple instances of that. But I want to read with you from 1 Kings 16 so that you get a sense of how he is first introduced to us in the Bible. Starting in verse 29. In the 38th year of King Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, but also he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethabal, the king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. Now, given that the kings of Israel before him had done things like sacrifice their own children in fire to the different, false gods and idols that were being served by the people there, that's quite a statement that he did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of these others did. So not exactly a flattering introduction. Here's maybe the good news for today. I always kind of have this joke that, one of the reasons I did prison ministry before COVID shut us down for so many years was because whenever I got depressed, I could go there and I was pretty sure, not always, but most of the time, I could find somebody whose life might actually be a little bit more messed up than my own. And maybe you could say that for Ahab. If you think you've got it rough, if you think you've done some bad things, if you think, oh my gosh, I just feel like I'm so unworthy, then just think of Ahab a little bit and you'll feel a little bit better because he is certainly one of the worst. But there's something to be learned about this passage that we're introduced to Ahab through. It says that he thought it trivial to simply commit the sins that had been committed before him. And it makes me think of family systems and how it seems that there are three approaches to the values and or lack of them for the way we're raised. One is that we grow up and those systems, and again, or the corruption of those systems, define what becomes normal to us. So if we grow up in a dysfunctional, abusive house where there's substance abuse and the erratic behavior of the adults around us, there's a certain sense where right or wrong, that becomes what is normal for us. And one of the options that kids growing up in that environment has is to simply pursue what they've been handed. And they may not make it worse, but they may not make it better. They just accept it as part of the dysfunctional normal of living in this messed up world. But it doesn't usually go that way. So often we take the rebellion, the sin, the corruption of those who raised us and the systems that we grew up in, and we add to it our own curiosity and our own brand of evil, imagining things that we could do that might even exceed that of the generation before us. This is what you hear when you hear the story of Ahab. He wasn't satisfied to simply live in the messed up world that he had inherited. He wanted to make it worse. He wanted to explore new ways of doing evil. Only in his mind, and sometimes in our own minds, we don't really think of it as evil. Now, the third way of responding to being raised in a dysfunctional environment is to have that moment of waking up and realizing this is not right. This is not how I want to live. This is not how I want to be treated. This is not how I will treat other people. And it's amazing. I've known some wonderful people who came out of horrendous backgrounds, but that was the defining moment of their life when they realized that just because their fathers, just because their households raised them in such a way, and that was the environment they grew up in, this realization that they don't have to share those values, they don't need to participate in. Unfortunately, when you read the story of Ahab, he didn't make that choice at all. He went what I would call the road most common, and he took the evil that was around him and added to it his own sin and his own depravity. The other thing, when you hear this story, this introduction to the King Ahab of Israel, you find out that he married a foreign wife, the Jezebel, the daughter of the Sidonian king. And Jezebel, as you read the narrative of the next few chapters of 1 King, you find out that she was an evil voice in his ear. I mentioned at the beginning that Ahab had this tendency to be kind of a sniveling little whiner. And that may be not a nice way to talk about a biblical character, but that's kind of the way I feel about him. So at one point he decides he wants to have this vineyard that's near his palace, and it belongs to a man named Naboth. And he goes to him and he tries to buy it from him, and Naboth says, no, this has been in my family for generations. This is my land. I'm not selling it. And he goes back to his palace and he pouts and he sulks and he whines. And sure enough, his wife Jezebel comes to him and says, you are the king of Israel. You can get whatever you want. If this man won't sell it to you, then simply kill him and it will be yours. Great advice from a loving wife, right? But of course, does he listen to what is right? Does he listen to the laws of Moses, to the commands of God that admonish not to commit murder? No, he listens to his wife because actually she's saying what he kind of already wants to hear. And so he carries out the murder of Naboth and seizes his vineyard. So here's the introduction. The two questions I'd like you to think about. Can you relate? When you look back to your own childhood and your own background, what were the parts that were healthy? What were the values that were good and constructive foundations for you to build your life? And can you be honest with perhaps those systems in your home that weren't helpful? And I want you to do some honest soul searching. Which of those things that weren't healthy have you continued? Have you allowed to accept as, well, this is just the way it is, and you've perpetuated the wrongs of the past into your present? I also want to ask, who do you listen to? For whatever reason, Ahab chose to listen to his wife, who filled his ears with poison and encouraged him to do even more evil than he may have done on his own. Who do you listen to? Do you have people in your life that you trust that will guide you in ways that are right, even if they're things that you don't really want to hear? It's so important for all of us to have people in our life that are pulling in the same direction, seeking Jesus and seeking his will for our lives. Because sometimes when it's simply about what we desire, we don't desire the things that the Lord desires. And when we set our hearts on them, so often we seek out the counsel of people who will tell us what we want to hear rather than what we need to hear. So I hope you can't relate too well to Ahab, but I hope through his story we can learn a little bit about our own family systems and the values or the struggles that we were raised with, and the way we have turned those over to the Lord for his redemption. God bless you. Amen.